Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's Sustainable Media Substack Live. Now, as a member of Gen Z, a social media user, and an avid news consumer, there is no topic that I would want to discuss more today than what we have slated. And we are very, very lucky to have David Bauder from the Associated Press with us. David is a veteran media correspondent who has spent decades tracking the intersection of journalism, politics, and public perception. His reporting often probes how news organizations shape civic life, how audiences shift, and where trust breaks down in that process. He has covered everything from presidential misinformation battles to newsroom reckonings and giving readers a steady lens on the forces shaping what Americans see and believe. He's here to discuss an AP article that he wrote entitled A Lost Generation of News Consumers. Survey shows how teenagers dislike the news media. And joining David, we have Steve and I. We have Matthew Stevens. Matthew is a college junior and an avid digital activist. He works for the Log Off movement, Design It For Us, and is currently an SMC Next Gen board member. So thank you, David and Matthew, for taking the time to be a part of today's conversation. So,
Welcome.
David, I want to start the conversation with you, the author of the article we are unpacking. So, the thesis of the piece seems to be that there is this negative youth sentiment towards news media. So, can you talk us through those sentiments and your findings while you were writing the piece?
I was interested in looking at because there was a study that came out from a center that talks about news literacy this fall, which surveyed a bunch of 13 to 18-year-olds on their attitudes towards the news media, and it's for generations now. Older people or adults have had a negative attitude towards the news media. This is the first time I'd seen anything surveying younger people, and it was a little bit eye-opening to me and distressing that they had a very strong negative feeling about it would be worth and journalism, and I thought it would be worth looking into why that might be the case. And so I spoke to some people that are involved in the issue and some young people who are studying to be journalists as well, to get at some of the feelings about why.
Absolutely. And I know you had mentioned that the News Literacy Project and their research. I want to point out for listeners, Gen Z was asked for one words to describe today's news media, and 84% of teens responded with something negative like biased, crazy, boring, fake, bad, depressing, confusing, scary, words like that. So now I want to turn to you, Matthew, as a member of Gen Z, to talk us through your, honest take and reaction to the survey and these findings. Do you and your peers share these negative sentiments towards the news media and journalism that they're finding in the report?
I personally do not hold those beliefs, but I have certainly seen it among my peers. And I feel like a huge driver of it is, as of course, they are turning to social media more for their news every day. And with the algorithms, it creates these echo chambers around it. So I don't think it's necessarily negativity towards media in general, but really media they disagree with. And so when they come up to these reports, they're gonna be like, oh, yeah, on a broader scale, I largely disagree because there's all these other people I disagree with out there, as opposed to these few I agree with. And so I feel like that's a lot what drives it. Additionally, beyond social media, a lot more young people are getting their news from podcasts because that's a lot more clippable format that's been able to be uh, spread on social media a lot more widespread. And that's a lot more commentary and conversation as opposed to really just stating the facts with a little bit of commentary on it. It's something different, but I think that's where a lot of it is coming from. And young people are simply just saying at this point, yeah, I don't like the news because they don't see the real work that goes into it. They just like to see those little videos pop up every once in a while on their social media feed.
Absolutely. And I kind of want to follow that thread as it relates to social media. So, David, you mentioned in the article that the majority of young people do get their information from, not just reputable sources, but rather from like social media and influencers. So, talk us through, in your opinion, from your perspective, where you said the role social media has played in shifting perceptions of journalism and the space in general.
Um, well, I thought Matthew made some very good points there about some of the polarization of media and having an effect on things. I think social media tends to, in many cases, reduce things to simplifications of some more complicated stories, and often tries to go for shock value in some things. And I think this is something that could get a negative view out there, and is it is provocative as opposed to a journalistic look at things. So I think that's a factor. I mean, I think there are a lot of factors that go into what has been happening with the attitudes towards journalism. I mean, in one case, it's very simple that the leading politician, or in many cases, the main people this age know, is somebody who has talked about fake news for his entire political career. That has to have an effect on something like that. I think the business of journalism, which has gone down over, which has really suffered over the last 20, 25 years, means that for many young people, they did not grow up with the habit of reading news on a regular basis. Either their parents didn't do it, or they were not used to seeing it. You know, I used to read a newspaper every day growing up, and my parents did, and now newspapers really in printed form are basically not even around. And I think news literacy has a lot to do with it. And for those who aren't familiar, that's just simply explaining that a lot of people don't know what journalism is. What are the missions of journalists and what they're supposed to do. I spoke with one college newspaper editor who said that a lot of her colleagues, a lot of her fellow students said that they thought that the main um, the newspaper is to protect people in power. Well, it's kind of the exact opposite of what they're supposed to do. So it shows a certain ignorance to what is going on out there. Um, you put a lot of these factors together, and I think and plus something really simple that I found in the survey, that um, there are not many positive cultural references of journalists that a lot of young people could point to. What do you think of journalists in movies or television? And they couldn't even come up with examples. And some of the examples they came up with were like Ron Burgundy, movie, and a lot of negative examples of journalists. So you put all those things together, and it kind of paints a tough picture for journalists and their
I think
image.
all I think all high school students should have to watch All the President's Men.
That's an example I wanted to reach. Yeah, that was popular when I was growing up, and it showed how Woodward and Bernstein broke the Watergate story. It was gripping, and it showed how journalism worked in the nitty-gritty. Spotlight, the movie about the Boston Globe, was something that was very good in the last 10 years or so, but it did not have the cultural impact of an All the President's Men.
Absolutely. And Matthew, I'm getting curious from your perspective, and I know we've talked a lot about this in other spaces as Gen Z activists. But what has the role of social media been in your life specifically, and how you get your news and information? How have you interacted with it as a young person? How do you see your peers interacting with it? What is kind of your take on media and news consumption online, specifically through social media?
Yeah, it's played a big role for the longest time for me, and it started pretty early too. I find that the platforms like X or Threads are usually the biggest for that side of things, because just there's a lot more chronological, order of things on those platforms. And so you always feel like you could be ahead of, the news almost. Sometimes someone would post a video from somewhere before like a major news site would ever pick it up. And so that kind of like citizen journalism always really caught on. I think a lot of young people were attracted to that as feeling almost empowered to be able to, create news by being the first to put it out there. And I think that's played a huge role in things. I know it's shifted the media industry, frankly. You see a lot more companies starting to say, hey, we need to figure out how to package our content for social media. CNN is a big example of this. A lot of young people are sharing, these little videos that CNN puts together, like explaining, what's going on with the war in Ukraine or something like that. And it's really completely shaken things up. And I think a lot of that's been driven to try to take on this issue of young people increasingly having this negative bias, and they're trying to correct that.
Hmm. And I think in talking about, corrections, it was already mentioned by you, David. You don't really leave readers empty-handed when it comes to potential solutions to these negative sentiments. You say one potential worthwhile endeavor could be to explore media literacy courses in schools. So, talk us through, how do you think the implementation of these media literacy programs would help reset and repair the relationship between youth and media?
Um, I think it can be just a lot of basic things about explaining what journalism is and what journalism does. Who, they experience media by going online and seeing a lot of things through social media coming after them, and explain, well, maybe not all of those things are reliable. Maybe those things are not is not news, it's rumor, and you can't trust it to be true. And here might be some places you can go and things you should look at to see whether it's reliable news, to see what sources are being cited for what that news is. Things, one of the things that was interesting in the study too is they asked a number of the young people about whether they believe journalists, check their facts, or whether they believe journalists were out trying to like do favors for people, or whether they corrected their errors. These are all things that are, second nature to reputable journalists, but a lot of people don't know that. These can be taught, but news literacy is not something that a lot of school districts look to, because they have so much else to do, and journalists aren't popular. So teaching some courses in what journalism means and what journalism can do is probably not something that schools want to. So a lot of factors.
David, I'm curious, how does
Are
the
you there? You're kind
AP,
of freezing up on me
oh,
here a little bit.
oh, there you go. David, I'm curious, how does the AP feed your work into the social media stream? Does everything go out? Do you have some say in what goes where? Do you get surprised when it shows up somewhere?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of times, I mean, because our we have many members, many people who subscribe to our material, governments and a lot of things, and it also goes out on our website. So, um, yeah, I mean, sometimes I do get surprised by people that I hear from that see something like that. It gets a pretty wide view of things, and um, sometimes somebody might send out links on social media, which is helpful as well.
And Matthew, I think I'm gonna hand it to you to close this out in some regard. Again, as a member of Gen Z, I'm curious, one, have you gone through any media literacy programs, or at least do you think that that would be an effective vehicle for change, specifically as it relates to Gen Z sentiments towards media news outlets? I know we've talked about this in the past as it relates to social media education, but I'm curious on how effective you think programs like that would be in actually altering and skewing new data towards more positive feelings.
Yeah, I've received a little bit of, that in school, even in college, but it starts in high school really, that they kind of push that a little bit. And it's mostly like, oh, just how to know it's a reputable source. And they'll show you this chart that's like, these are the most trustworthy sites and goes all the way down. And it is kind of like base things on that. But that's about the extent of the education. It's totally inadequate when you look at the reality of things, especially if we're saying more young people are turning to social media for digesting media. You got to adapt them to that. One of the common themes that I see is people will post a video from a long time ago and say it's about a current situation. And that's a way to deceive people in terms of media literacy. Another thing that we have to worry about now is AI generated deepfakes. There's some smaller things like every once in a while someone won't know what the Onion or the Babylon Bee is, though. Once people figure those out, they're like, oh yeah, that's fake. But there's much more deceptive tactics that are being deployed to intentionally deceive people that the media literacy that I at least received back in school is totally inadequate to equip students with the tools they need to properly assess sources and know what reliable information is.
Wait,
Yeah.
the Babylon Bee is fake?
I kid you not. Yes, the other day I went onto the Onion intentionally and read an article, and it was one of those ones where I was like, "Oh man, I almost thought it was real from them," but I was like, "Wait a second, this is the Onion again." It's just one of those things though that not everyone recognizes that.
I have this fantasy that all the big news organizations have a set of basic rules about how they operate. They're not identical, but things like fact checking and making corrections. I just wish that there could be an agreed upon set of standards because then you'd know that when it's the Washington Times, for example, they don't make corrections because they make things up. So you'd be able to come up with a mark or an agreed upon community of journalists who all have a little J that they could like a trust mark. I've always thought that would happen. There was a um I mean I guess maybe there are some organizations that like News Trust that try and do versions of that.
Yeah, and
I I'm sorry, I'm breaking up. I can't. I didn't even really see what you said. If you were addressing to me at all, Stephen.
I was pontificating.
Well, I want to thank today's conversationalists, David and Matthew, for joining us. While we do not have all the answers, obviously, conversations like this are a great starting place to repair that relationship between younger generations and the news media. So we look forward to our next conversation. So tune in next week.